Hi, everybody. Today is December 8th, 2021, and this is Coronavirus Conversation. I'm Dr. Randy Bock. I'm happy that you are allowing me within your computer, your phone, your world. And we're going to take a little bit of a tour around coronavirus. Um, it's imperfect. I've been rather busy. I'm taking on a new job and getting a book ready. So the coronavirus preparations are not necessarily up to my own perfect, well, imperfect, but standards and where I'd like this to be. So please take that in stride. I did spend some time kind of reviewing and researching some of these things, but not perfectly fully. So you might have to carry on some of the aspects yourself over time. Um, what's new in the world of COVID? Well, on a personal basis, it seems like we're living a little bit in, I don't know, is it Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass? Sometimes you're there, sometimes you're not. Sometimes there's, I guess Alice had one pill that would make you, or the Mad Hatter, I guess, had one drink that would make you small and one drink that would make you large. It was memorialized by Jefferson Airplane in the late 60s, early 70s. And Grace Slick, she took Alice in Wonderland and made it psychedelic. It sometimes feels that way, that we're entering a world where there are tacit agreements. There's, winks, nods, understanding or not. There's kind of a very visible political frisson, to use the French word, of kind of a feeling, like a chill that you get. I'm working in a town outside of Boston right now, and on occasion I've had chances to go into stores in that location, a little bit more exurban, suburban, um, and things are, wildly sane. I mean, it's a relaxing thing. Was at a restaurant. People don't really make the pretense of doing very much with the masks. The staff, by our Lord and Master, Governor Charles Baker, um, edict, which is long overdue to have been removed. Um, People have them on, but they don't make you wear them for the magical 15 or 20-foot walk of shame from the front door to your table, wherein people all around you are not wearing masks, operating under the illusion that somehow, if you're standing up by the front door, you're more likely to get COVID, even though that's where there's more ventilation, but you're okay for sitting down. Who knows what this all means? And uh, there's a lot of other indication. I'm not going to go into all of them. That people are a little bit over that. I had went to a gas station slash convenience store today, and nobody made any real word about it. I was kind of just milling around while the gas tank was filling up just to keep warm, and looking around. Oddly enough, there always used to be newspapers there. Now they just kind of dropped that. There are no newspapers. Sometimes I don't really get the newspapers except glancing at things online. But I always like to see the panoply of newspapers, see what's kind of what they choose to put up. But this convenience store has completely got rid of them. I think, is that a good sign, a bad sign? I mean, I think it shows lack of interest in the paper. Probably that's environmentally good, because pixels are a little bit more efficient. You don't need a whole newspaper to get the few couple stories that you may or may not read, crossword puzzle or something like that, and it's much more efficient otherwise. Anyway, it's interesting as well that there's kind of this sensibility. We had a little bit of a holiday dinner for my workplace, and they were remarking that they got straws with their drinks. People ordered Coke and lemonade and iced tea, whatever was a lunchtime thing, pretty light. That wasn't a 3 martini lunch. And everyone was really happy they got straws, and the straws looked so sturdy that people thought they were plastic straws. In fact, they were, kind of a new paper of some type or another. But it seems so quaint to think back just a couple of years ago that people were all worried about plastic straws ruining the planet, and now they just throw away masks endlessly. I um, have this. Uh, I've got a few weird ticks or quirks. One of them is that I like to clean up the areas where I'm walking. And so when I walk the dog, I strap him around my waist. It's got a special leash for that. So I've got both hands, and I have a like one of those shelf grabbers, 3 foot length. And I pick stuff up. I carry a couple plastic bags and fill them, empty them as I go. And there's so many masks. I can't even tell you. I started, last year I was taking pictures of them because they're all different places, and I thought they'd be an interesting set of artifacts when we look upon all this as so quaint in its own time, if ever. If that is, presuming we leave this this cycle of hysteria, pandemia, panic, and manipulations and so forth. But at which point, so getting back to the conservation thing, it was great having a straw, and they thought it was so awesome to have a plastic straw, which are sturdy and don't dissolve. But they've kind of figured that out, I guess, a little bit. So these are great straws, even though they're paper, and they did not wilt over the length of lunch. But in the meanwhile, people are just throwing away all these masks, and they all basically have a strip of aluminum, at the very least, on them. And they're garbage and they're paper, and people just toss them, and they use them over and over and over again. Plastic gloves, I pick them up all the time. And I used to just pick them up. This is kind of a mystery for my listeners. There's a little kind of a lakeside, brookside park, and there's a kind of a cul-de-sac dead end. And I invariably found these little bottles of Fireball whiskey, the nip size, and always with an inverted glove. This is back in the ancient days, pre-COVID. And I always wondered about that, and I'm going to leave that up as a question. If anybody wants to attack that, what I came up with is a rationale that I always found those two things together: a little whiskey bottle and an inverted glove, on these kind of quiet places along the park. Anyway, now I find lots of plastic gloves, but they're blue, and they seem to be COVID gloves. People are just germ phobic. I still find it incredibly sad, and I literally do find it sad when I see these. Today on this walkway, Parkside Riverside walk, is kind of a grandmother type. She's probably 55, 60, and two young kids, and the two young kids are wearing masks. She's not. They are. They have zero risk of getting illness, and they're wearing masks. And I see this all different times in different ways. And there's just all kinds of going overboard with the various aspects of I don't know what to say about it. Overkill. Um, there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm not going to be able to cover it all because the political scenes keep changing, but a lot of it is in the wrong direction. I think that these variants, I like to point out that the common cold, it consists 20% of them or so are coronaviruses. Where did those coronaviruses come? They came from other coronaviruses. Viruses mutate, and they're I don't know what number, hundreds of millions of replications per humans, per infection and so forth. So they have the ability to mutate and whatnot. The viruses don't have brains, but in a group sense, they are more successful if they don't knock over their hosts. It's a little bit like a mosh pit. Or if you go to a concert, the back in the day when we had concerts and people grouped together very closely and tightly, this one other thing comes to mind, that people think if they're going to be wealthy someday, they want to get their own island, or their desert kingdom, or live on top of a mountain and so forth. But as Barbara Streisand said, people who need people are the luckiest people on earth, or something like that. Well, people actually are really happiest when they lose their individuality, when they lose their sense of constraint. And so they go to huge concerts and they scream, or rallies or whatever, and they yell stuff, or sports things. They go to the football, the Big Ten or the NFL or whatever, and they get to scream at their, along with everybody else. It's hugely liberating, and they lose their sense of what they have to do. Their sense of having to think. I think there is, a certain aspect of our kind of innate instinctual tribal sensibility that we just want to be part of something and yell and scream and go into battle, or show our cohesion as a group. And getting back to the mosh pit, so people are all overjoyed to be all kind of together and screaming for their favorite rock band, country band, whatever it happens to be. And at various times back in the 80s, 90s, and so forth, and probably recently, I don't go as much or ever anymore. But the singer or somebody would jump into the top of the crowd, and then the crowd would kind of like put their hands up and like centipedes walking, kind of move this singer, whatever, from place to place and then back maybe to the stage or whatever. And other people would kind of get up on stage and jump to the throng. And this happened in small clubs, large venues, and so forth. Now, just getting back to virions or viruses. If the singer were 1,000 pounds, this would not work. The singer would jump into the crowd and boom, they'd collapse. He'd knock over and break a few bones and probably hurt himself along the way. And everybody who was going to be transporting him around the audience would be crushed. This would not be a successful, whatever the term of art is, mosh pit transportation, moshportation for the singer or the band or the crowd or anything like that. So it's not helpful for the singer to outweigh the ability of the audience to carry him. A singer that's too light, on the other hand, I don't know, he might get lost and fall through the cracks between people. So there's kind of a right size, 150 pounds to 200 pound, whatever the number is, 100 pound singer can get moved very easily and then get back on stage or whatever. Think about viruses now. Your coronavirus does that. The common colds, the adenovirus, the rhinovirus, and so forth, they're able to kind of get onto a crowd similarly and then pass from person to person to person to person, and they don't really do much damage to the ones who are carrying it, and then they get back up or they're back to their same place. Now, along the way, they do certain mutations, which the singers don't. Crowd surfing. There you go. Thank you, Susan. So there's the term of art, crowd surfing. So viruses crowd surf us. And if the virion is so deadly, like Ebola or something like that, or anthrax, whatever, then I think anthrax is a bacterium, but then it's just going to knock you out, and it's kind of just obliterate like an asteroid or meteor or something like hitting, and that's that. It's a lot of damage, but it doesn't really transmit. Maybe more like an anvil, like Wile E. Coyote gets from the Roadrunner, or something like that. Boom, splat. So that's the common cold type of virion ultimately. So there are stronger virions that have hosts, and they don't necessarily have to worry about the crowd surfing aspect because they have a place to go back to. So the original SARS 2003, that's a bat virus, and bats and humans don't really interact that much or that well, but supposedly at the wet markets or whatever, or maybe there's some other malfeasant aspect, there was an intersection where people wound up eating bats, or maybe they got them raw and so forth, and they contracted it. So like influenza, which exists with a host, a reservoir, in pigs, for instance, in China, they bring the pigs in the winter. That can be a somewhat stronger virus for humans and knock them out a little bit more because they have someplace to go back to and incubate. But since COVID doesn't apparently have a natural animal reservoir host, and we're not living in the dark ages with rats running around our houses in a good part of the world, that is, and it doesn't appear that there's much transmission otherwise, and we don't, in the United States, we don't keep our domesticated our domestic livestock in-house and so forth. I suppose there's a possibility for our domestic pets to have it and transmit it, but they don't necessarily transmit amongst themselves. They don't herd. So the pigs herd and they pass amongst themselves, and they come into the houses and so forth. But we don't really herd our dogs and cats in the same way. I mean, there are some dogs on a dog run here and there, but it's not the same thing. So, my point here is that coronavirus at some point is going to have to choose what it is, and it doesn't really choose, but it's more of a population interaction effect with us, their host. And since coronaviruses already have become common colds by virtue of presumably attenuating, and they might have started as pangolin or bat or giraffe or who knows what viruses that somehow got moved over into the human sphere. So too will COVID at some point attenuate. That is, it becomes milder and milder, so it doesn't knock over the host. So it can crowd surf. So if it weighs 1,000 pounds, there's no crowd surfing. If it weighs 500 pounds, there's no crowd surfing. That's what happened originally. But it can, it can cause damage if there is someplace else in the, backstage where more of these 500-pound singers can hang out because they're being maintained and sustained elsewhere, and then they can keep jumping into the crowd, and they can do various kind of like craters, like a meteorite or something like that. But that winds up stopping once we figure out how to stay away from the host. So that's a little kind of, I think that's my version of viruses 101. So I don't think as we go through the Greek alphabet, mind you, skipping new because it sounds like new, N-E-W, skipping the Greek letter chi, which looks like our, kind of Roman letter, transliteration of the Chinese pictogram for our dear Chinese leader. So we went to Omicron, however you might pronounce that, which anagrammatizes to moronic, as we pointed out last week. So this is going almost ipso facto. QED naturally turn out to be less severe than previous versions. Now, speaking to the vaccine aspect, the vaccine is somewhat of an irrelevancy, and it will become more so over time for a couple different reasons. One is that since the virus is self-attenuating to a milder version with each iteration, with each generation, you don't need a vaccine as much. Number two, the crowd that is potentially susceptible to it is skewing younger and younger as more of the oldsters around the world are getting vaccinated, preferentially by virtue of edicts and their own individual personal preferences and so forth. And young people don't get that sick to begin with, so it's going to wind up being less of a thing. So the people for whom it would be more serious, they're protected for the most part, and or isolated, and or they're doing super masking kind of like personal protection aspects. So they're self-sequestering in one way or another, either immunologically or socially, from the virus. And so that is going to leave, less damage, and that is pretty much what's been happening. I think we keep, kind of misconstruing these, again, purposefully in a large part, misconstruing what's going on for political ends based on people's desire and love for control. And I would be lying if I didn't wish that I could control some aspects of this. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So you're going to have to, go by what you hear, see, and read, and try to keep digging and so forth. I hope that made some sense. So the conclusion that I would have is that Omicron is probably less virulent, less damaging in kind of a personal way than the previous. It may be just as contagious because they're all, frankly, every single one of these coronaviruses are almost essentially precisely the same size, which is like less than a micron, and it goes through masks and so forth. And virus is gonna virus, and these kind of cold viruses, obviously, as we've seen with other cold viruses, are very good from passing from person to person with sneeze and whatnot, aerosol, and they do a little bit more in the winter than the summer because of closed windows and recycled air. But I don't think it's really warranting all the kind of extra, we'll call them, communistic kind of controls that are being applied, where people are being regulated. Back in the Soviet Union, you may not realize, but they had internal passports. So you might, be living in Uzbekistan doesn't mean you can go visit Moscow. You had a particular Uzbeki passport that was particular for that region, and that was that. And it's a little bit less well known that the Jews had their own passport, even though it wasn't tied to an area within the Soviet, so that their actions and travels would be restricted. So if you were a Jew living in St. Petersburg and you wanted to go to Murmansk or something like that, I don't know why you would. You would have to have basically a kind of an internal visa in order to do so. So this is an internal control. So if you think these things are going to happen only on the air flights at some point, no, they're not. Obviously, we've seen them already with restaurants, and at some point in a later date, they'll probably be used for travel. The EU, the European Union, is probably a European, it's probably ED, which also stands for erectile dysfunction, probably European disunion. At some point, because a lot of the preconceptions of we are kumbaya, one nation, open borders, all that kind of stuff, and we're going to have one currency, one this, one that, and we're going to share each other's woes and debts, and Germany's going to wind up paying for Greece's profligacy and whatnot. That was a kind of a part of the 90s and aughts or zeros, 2000s, and somewhat into the teens, the 2010s. But we might see less of that as we see the vulnerabilities of, kind of an open system like that. But not necessarily. I mean, I'm not sure they're all full vulnerabilities. I think there are issues with, migration. The Syrian migration that kind of passed all through Europe as soon as they were able to get into Bulgaria, or Greece, or whatever, or the bottom of Italy. Boom, they're all through Europe, and then they would just migrate to the place with the best kind of cash welfare benefits. So they're going to have some issues. We're going to probably go through some slides quickly in a little bit that may cover this in part, but there are, distinct differences between the nation states, if they still are nation states within Europe, on how they are doing, not so much on the viral basis, but on how they're doing on the freedom basis. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I hope that intro made some sense. I can't promise. Let's see. I need my glasses. I'm going to try to put up some other screens here. And let's see. All right, so we're going to just kind of go quickly around the world here. Let me just share this window, and I'm going to Okay. Give me just a second. I apologize. So I'm going to share this window here. This is an article from 2015. If you can see it here, a SARS-like cluster of circulating bat coronaviruses show potential for human emergence. I think we covered this briefly last week. Ralph Baric, he's kind of in prominence right now. He's in North Carolina, and Zhengli Shi is in Wuhan. And these were the major writers of this article. And they had a lot of social, intellectual intercourse over coronavirus, SARS-1. And then this is all about the gain of function and how much we knew and how much we were involved as a country. And we kind of outsourced. I think it was called rendition when they did it with terrorists or terrorist suspects through the quote unquote war on terror. They did renditions to third countries where they could, interrogate the suspects in a more vigorous fashion. So they outsourced the waterboarding and so forth to Egypt and other places where those things are a little, less observed on a press basis. This is an interesting question about Wuhan. Is why Ralph Baric from the North Carolina, I forget what federal facility is called, but that's basically our Wuhan Institute of Virology. We have one here, and there's a lot of interest, and kind of the conspiracy people are curious, about the way the patents have come out, and I think you should follow this name here. So I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see, and you can come to the article later. I'll try to put a link to it, and just follow the traces of what's been happening with these vaccines and why the vaccines are pushed as hard as they are. One of the things about HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, and/or ivermectin, is that they are, I believe they're both. I'm pretty sure HCQ is off patent, and ivermectin's already been invented, and whoever owns the patents to it owns it for valid antibiotic, antiparasitic reasons. But these new Wuhan, Wuhan virus, SARS-2 treatments, they coincide a lot with the laboratories in question. So the question is why we were offloading or outsourcing or doing rendition on the SARS virus to China, and why we were paying them to do some of the research, and how much of it as well we were aware of and responsible for. I think St. Anthony of Fauci is going to have a fair reckoning to do, even though he's been whistling past the graveyard, and in this case almost a literal one. So what else did I kind of go over? This is an older slide from October. I'll just make it bigger. So it's a GIF, I guess. I hope you can see it in real time here. These are the certain European leaders. Obviously, this is Boris Johnson. I don't know the names of everybody else here, and I apologize. But with cameras, without cameras, and you could watch this all night long. We see this a fair amount. The kind of gross hypocrisy. What else we have here? so there's a letter to Dr. Ralph Barrick about North Carolina and whatnot. So Xi Jinping is a commentator, international affairs, writes for the China Daily. Basically, this is a Chinese PRC functionary, and he's attacking the U.S. as the author of the COVID uh, SARS CoV-2 Wuhan lab. So it's kind of an interesting piece of propaganda. This is from China itself, the ChinaDaily.com.cn China. So I'll send the link for this as well. It's just interesting to see the attack from the other way. We just make the assumption that it's the China virus, and this was done in 2021. So this is post-Trump. So it's not even Mr. Trump, blonde hair, whatever, yelling China. And here the virus itself is laughing at that proposition because, oh, after all, it's the United States. I think this is actually 15% right. There's a little bit of truth to it. What else do we have here? This is a nice little thing you might take. I don't think we're going to have the time to do it here. This is a COVID charts quiz, and I'll put up a link for this as well. See if you can take the quiz, see how well you do. And it's really the point of this quiz is showing who, whether human actions really make a difference. I've pointed this out in one of our episodes on North Carolina versus South Carolina, and they had the same size, same number of people, pretty much the same population. They both have Republican governors. One did lockdown, one didn't, and they had almost identical patterns of infectious spread and so forth. So there's very little that all these edicts actually do on a real basis because the virus goes through masks, it hangs around people and whatnot. Let's see. I just want to give a shout out to Alex Berenson, who's always been an inspiration. There's an article here from the Federalist from a couple days ago. The corporate media doesn't want you to listen to Alex Berenson. He was my favorite Twitter feed, and so for all the good links I've gotten from him, I want to give a shout out here. I think you have to go out of your way to follow him. I'm pretty sure he's on Substack, but I'll put a link to this so you can find the links. There's a couple other things here. This is Euromomo, which maybe you shouldn't say to people right off the bat, .eu. And this goes over the various kind of case fatality rates and incidence rates and so forth through Europe. And I'm not going to have time to spend a lot of time on this, but I do recommend that you check it out. There's graphs and maps, and they provide some interesting data because it's a little bit more age segregated and somewhat easier to find than what we find with our own CDC data. Or at least for me, I find this a little bit easier to access, and the Israeli ones sites as well, age stratify. And so a lot of what we see with case reporting and so forth, they don't talk about the ages. When we see deaths, we don't see who's dying and whatnot. And this goes, this has an interesting part about excess deaths. So within these red lines here, and if you can see them, you would see if it goes above this, you'd see basically a substantial increase. And this is corrected. There's a little bit of zigzagging based on day of the week, that kind of stuff, because nobody wants to work at Saturday, Sunday. Nobody wants to report deaths. And so this is kind of what the normal range would be in bluish gray here per age group. And you see that COVID. Well, this is through the years. This goes back to 2017. So if you want to, check the more recent stuff, this is goes into 2020, 2021 here. You can see that there were some increases in case fatality, or in general mortality rate, but pretty much in the older age group. So here's over 85. They had relatively, but if you look on the left-hand side here, you see the number of deaths are actually, smaller numbers than the groups that have more people. Well, I take that back. There are higher numbers in these cohorts which have very much fewer people. Like there's only about 1% of the population, maybe 1.5% of the population over 85 years of age, or maybe even be less than that. And so their deaths went up, but that's not much of the population. Your majority of your population is median age depends on the place and whatnot. we're talking about most of the population, 44 and below, and COVID really wasn't a thing for them very much at all within this duration. So they're pretty much banded, tightly banded around their normal death rates, and ditto for young people as well. Here's 0 to 14. Here's all ages. When you take them together, there were some increases, but again, these principally came from these older age groups. So there are more people in 65-year-old group and whatnot, and so this is a problem. And again, when you get into the 45 64-year-old group, it's mostly people with comorbidities. So this is a bimodal illness, COVID. The people who are young, if you're under 50 pretty much without comorbidities, this is not an illness for you. You shouldn't really have done anything because it doesn't affect you. So this is a nice little graph here. I'll make a note of this one to put in the links later on. There's another longer paper I'll link as well, which talks about infectious fatality rates. I'm not going to go into this about COVID. What else do we have here? This, I guess, goes back to my first point about Ralph Barrick. I apologize for that ad there. And who has the patents for COVID. So I'm going to do a slideshow in just a second here. Let me get this prepped for you. And these are not in perfect order. I apologize. Let's see what the let's see. Yeah, a couple good points here. Well, let me get to the question first. Are routine PCR COVID tests differentiating between different variants? No, they're not. They're just positive and negative. And this is, again, part of the problem with forcing the vaccine on people now, because the variants have moved down the line. And so the vaccines are ancestral, and they are referring to the pre-Greek letter versions of COVID. And so that you're getting a vaccine that looks like somebody from which it's already, changed. So if you saw the first of the Brady Bunch, maybe the wrong example. I'm trying to think of what was it? The Partridge Family. I think they were related. Or at any rate, the Osmonds or something like that, whatever, or some other family band. You see one, you get used to looking for one, and then the other one comes along and looks sort of like that. It takes you a little while to realize they're part of the same family. So we are right now getting vaccines to a version that's old. But no, regular tests are just positive and negative for COVID. They don't refer to variants. Variant strains have to be done further in the lab. And then another point here from a listener is that the authorities must continue to require testing, otherwise the case demic will end. Well, that's an excellent point. We're going to get to that in the slides. So let's see what we can do here. This is a couple slides together. The CDC should roll out a new program, get the shot or get shot. This is a serious tweet from somebody, I don't know, Lars McMurtry. The unvaccinated need to be rounded up and lined up in front of open trenches. Their choice is simple. America has had enough of their virus. We need to get back to normal life, with or without them. So it would be normal life. We would get back to normal life if we basically executed, some, I don't know, 20, 35, 30, 40% of the population, whatever it happens to be. And a bunch of people who don't need the vaccine, as we showed from the other data before. Everyone easily under 44 and healthy, probably under 50 and healthy, don't need the vaccine at all. And we'd be assassinating them, and then we'd go back to normal life. That's awesome. So here's normal life as a joke. San Francisco police are looking for any information about this man caught not wearing a mask in the supermarket. Well, this is a little bit about San Francisco, because crime is going nuts, and they're not prosecuting this, but they are prosecuting this. And to that point about what is normal, this guy here probably is yearning for the halcyon days when Andrew Cuomo was a hero. And he was followed, mind you, by a bunch of governors, Democrats all, who did exactly the same thing, who forced COVID-19 infected patients back into the nursing homes. So if you want to talk about actually killing people, this was state sanctioned, or state ignorant or whatever. Tom Wolf's health secretary was one Dr. Levine, who's now a national, if not international, figure. This is kind of lunacy. A couple, I'm going to do, there's going to be a lot of kind of fun memes, slides that I've been picking out, so I hope you like them as well. A guide to protecting yourself against the deadly Omicron virus variant. And you basically use earplugs. I can't believe it's Omicron season already. I still have my Delta decorations up. And this one here is maybe a little harder to see. Good Morning Britain, which I guess like Good Morning America, had a poll and they took it down immediately because they were asking, is it time to make vaccines mandatory? Speaking to the previous gentleman's point, and everybody said no. So they took the they took the tweet down. I wonder why. This is from a session I was at pandata.org, and it's a complicated slide. I'm not going to go into it deeply. Maybe this next slide would be a little bit easier to figure out. Whoops. These are this is a log scale of year 2021 deaths adjusted for, oops, year 2020 deaths. So this year over previous year, and the data is by months and by age group. So in the young age group, there's not really much change at all, vaccine, no vaccine, and all these age groups. Even amongst the oldsters, there's not that much benefit in mortality. Does not really seem to make much of a difference. So we're forging ahead with vaccine, but again, we're doing it for a strain that has already left. There was 5-6 strains ago, or maybe more. So we're vaccinating everybody to that ancestral one, which is not around, and the benefits are not really that marked. This is a complicated slide, but these are by age groups also. So that goes down this way, young, 0 to 14, 15 to 44, 45 to 64, et cetera. The blue is good. So this is saving lives, and this is these are days after a vaccine. And I think these are each data point is a week. So 7 days here. So for the older people, there is a benefit, a short-term multi-month benefit and reduction in mortality with vaccine. So I'll repeat that. So actually, this is even age 15 to 44, but so in all the age groups except for kids, no benefit at all. There is apparently some diminished mortality in the young, in post-vaccination. It doesn't really matter so much in this group because the numbers are so low. They're vanishingly small number of fatalities in general. But in the ages where people did have some fatality from COVID, they do get benefit. But after that, it's back up. It's kind of like it's a little like an iceberg. Here's the ocean, and here's the iceberg. It grows back up again. So either that wears off, or people are dying from other reasons, or I don't know. I can't really tell you. But there is probably some actual effect from the vaccines early on, but it's not long lasting. That was just some notes I made. Another point was kind of the forest fire effect that we should actually be seeing fewer deaths this year than last year because a lot of the dry tinder had burned early on. So people were more feeble, more susceptible to dying from COVID would already have died. Just as a kind of a getting back to the previous slide, the age group, the COVID-19 infectious fatality rate is vanishingly low in young people, and it gets a little bit higher as you age. This is, I think, the estimated average vaccine fatality rate, a VFR, and it's also low in these age groups, but you see it's somewhat similar in the lower age groups to the virus itself. So for these groups, you're not necessarily getting any benefit by being vaccinated, which has its own risks. And if you've already had the COVID in the first place, and in these age groups, which I think larger and larger fractions of our population have, then there's very little point to it. There is a differential if you're 85 plus. Even if the vaccine has some risk for you, you have more risk from the virus. So this is virus vaccine. And so I think this is something to take to heart. And again, you're old, go for it. Want double boosters, triple boosters. You don't have that much long term, so forth. There's some danger from the vaccine, but it's less than the virus if you're old. If you're young, it's the other way around and or meaningless. So getting back to Alex Berenson, this is a quote from the article I just showed you. They overpromised. They were caught. He's talking about experts and public health officials, scientists. They were caught short by what happened in the summer in Israel and what is happening everywhere else. And so they need to admit that they have essentially no credibility left with a lot of population. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, he's either right or he's wrong, but he shouldn't be censored either way. If you have an idea, put it out there. And if the idea is wrong, prove it's wrong. If it's not wrong, don't shut people up. So I'm going to go into slide fest here. This may make some sense as together, maybe not. This is apparently an actual saying, a quote from Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau the second. You're going to be able to get your vaccine as soon as you turn 5. I know you're excited. I know you're eager. He was talking to kids, I guess in a TV presentation or something like that. This is craziness, as we've seen above. This is mainstream media. The light should, be on. In this case, it could be almost anything you imagine, but in the wealthy elite who rape children on, Epstein's Island, but instead they're looking at the Omicron variant. So, there's a little bit of distraction. A lot of the news is by omission. What things get emphasized, and you don't think about other things that are not. And so, a guy I follow here on Twitter, at this point, I'd feel more comfortable if COVID hosted a press conference on how to protect us from the government. So that takes a little bit of thought there, but I essentially agree. The government has more intrusions and more danger potentially than a virus which affects the elderly, who are, guess what, elderly. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. This is a nasal swab. I don't think nasal swab should be done this way. I had one myself a few weeks ago. I had to be in the hospital, and they do like a really intrusive job. I've done thousands of swabs like this to get antigen testing for the flu and whatnot. If you just blow your nose first, then all the mucus is in the front. You don't need to do very much of this. You don't need to go dig deep. You just blow your nose, and it's all that wet stuff is right there. You get it right from the antrum of the nose. You don't have to go through all this painful part. But there's a little bit of this kind of vindictive aspect. My 5th booster didn't work because you didn't get your first. And so I think some of the anger is taken out here. I might be wrong. I just think there would be an easy thing to institute to make this an easier to, if you had to do this lunacy, make it easy on people. So they just blow their nose a little bit, get the swab, the testing would be fine. I'm sure you could prove this. Again, this is a little bit of hypocrisy. Going back to the previous slide, if Trump were still president, you can bet that the vaccine fatality rate would be prime in the news. And so this is similar to what's going on with the travel ban. When Trump did it, it was bad. Biden does something similar, that's great. These are the slides on the right are just factitious. They're jokes basically, but they apply. So the same kind of thing. This is not a joke. These are actual tweets a year and a half apart from one Ms. Harris. I think you might recognize her from public service. And basically pointing out the same thing about the travel ban undermines our nation's core values. But now it's basically cool. And this is a little bit different. It's cut off, but a cancer patient gets coronavirus, died of coronavirus. An AIDS patient, I would say HIV, gets coronavirus, died of coronavirus. Person with a car crash, coronavirus, obviously died. But a healthy older person dies after getting vaccinated, died because they were old. So this is a way of doing the same basic thing. It's diversionary. Here's a couple more slides. You can figure these out yourself. So tell me, these variants you speak of, are they in the room with us now? Yes, there are variants. I think if you look carefully, you'll find variants, but they are distinctions without a difference, very likely. So this juxtaposition, I found this tweet. If you don't recognize natural immunity, you are anti-science. Well, that's true. Nobody phrased it that way. Wikipedia itself has been polluted to change the essence of what herd immunity is, to make it vaccine-oriented. Here's just our life these days, just another shot from the Wall Street Journal, from an airport or wherever. Everyone's masked up. They're not close to each other. This terminal probably has like 40-foot ceilings. Are they at any risk from getting anything from each other? They're probably all vaccinated. No, this is craziness. The masks, have to go. People need to get smarter. So here's, I don't know if Linus actually said this or not, but he could have. And here is the same type of thing. Amy Siskin, she organized those, I think the pussy hat, the pink hat, resist marches against Trump. She's got an anti-Trump book and whatnot. I don't know if she's a journalist or an activist or whatever, but basically same thing as Ms. Harris. The same dates. Um, Trump is trying to kill us with a vaccine, and now she loves the vaccine just because the president's changed, although the vaccine was developed in the Trump administration. Um, Same thing about Mr. Berenson, about what you have to do and whatnot. This is a street sign that, not a street sign, it's a private sign, and I wonder if we will have a turnaround. No turnaround. Every time I go by this thing, I wonder whether it's a deep message. And over here, this is maybe a little bit hard to see in the edges. The UK does not have vaccine passports. They are doing better. They have fewer patients in intensive care. Mind you, the ones with the highest numbers, this is 60 per million people. So there's still, not a lot. Belgium has 10 million people or something like that. So 60 times 10 is 600 people in the ICU in a whole country, and then you're supposed to lock it down based on that. I mean, really? I mean, I'm not sure Belgium is, but Austria is probably not that much bigger, and they're doing lockdowns and whatnot. Italy's, doing passports, and I mean, it's just craziness. I just don't get it. There's not that much damage being done right now. So this is a long quote. You can pause this if you want. This is the local newspaper here. It's kind of I apologize, it's a dark slide, but keep down the recognition aspect. But my point is, she's getting her picture. She's on the front page of the local newspaper. She's probably never been, never will be again. And it's her store advertising her. And this is the look she has to have. I find this, I don't know if it's virtue signaling or she's just trying to show she's got a safe space. I find that really sad. Her business probably suffered a lot during COVID, and here's her chance to put a big smile on and attract people into the warmth of her store and whatnot. And we are damaging ourselves. We're doing it in so many ways, and it's damaging to the kids, and so forth. So maybe go through some of these slides quickly. This is kind of a juxtaposition. This one's here as a joke on the right. He didn't say that, but that's a joke quote. But over here is basically the essence of this, that we are making Americans jump through hoops, but anybody can enter from anywhere, basically from through the Mexican border without any testing. Does that make any sense? The NIH director himself, everyone thinks it's Fauci. It's not. He's the NIAID. That lockdowns don't really accomplish that much. Here's a little bit of the hypocrisy. Mr. Biden is in a restaurant without a mask when he tells everybody to wear them. This slide at the right actually happened to me at a restaurant. When I say it happened to me, these people were in the restaurant, and for easily a half hour, they're both wearing masks, chatting away, so forth. I figured eventually their food was going to come, and yes, it did, and they took the masks off for the duration. I don't get it. I don't understand why people do this, what the point is. And there's a quote here. I don't know if this applies, but you can read the quote if you like. I just don't really get the point. They're both they know each other. They probably chit chat or maybe shared a car on the way over. I have no idea. And they're wearing not just a mask, but this is the N95. This is super duperest mask you can have. And as soon as they got their food, which took actually a while, it was a pretty slow restaurant. They took them off. I mean, I just don't get it. Like, what does that accomplish? The NBA. I was watching a game the other night. It's Portland, Boston, and the NBA makes stupid rules. We pretend to obey them. So they nominally have the masks on, and what is that proving? I have no idea. The whole thing just looks so stupid, and I don't know. The NBA does this because why? I don't know. And here's a quote you can read. This is true. Italy's making restrictions with a super green pass. I don't know if the slide capture is correct, but because it's not in Italian. But basically, that's what's going on. So the moment you show a Vax Pass anywhere, you have bought into a segregationist system. Eventually, that system will prevent you from doing something you want to do. And that refers earlier to what I mentioned with the Soviet. A couple longer quotes here. I recommend you pause this and look them over. They're similar ideas. Basically, George Carlin's talking about the importance of individuality, independence, and integrity. So, if you stay safe, I'll stay free. You stay compliant, I'll stay defiant. You say bah, I'll say nah. The final variant and communism. and this one is, I don't really buy into this perfectly, because I think that testing positive for COVID doesn't really mean that much. It just means you had a positive test, and you might very well have the virion, but really the question is whether you're getting ill or whether people are getting ill. I had a contractor tell me he couldn't finish a job this week because his employees had turned positive for COVID. And so I wrote back, are they sick? No, no, they're not sick. They've all been vaccinated. They're fine. But, it just becomes a bureaucratic thing like the NBA, where you can't play in the game, or you can't go to work because, you've tested positive. But this test, has its own issues. But even if it's completely accurate, it does, again, it's another distinction without a difference. It doesn't really mean that much. So I think that's it for my slides. Um, I hope that was reasonable. Um, and I'm going to call it an evening. I hope you have a wonderful week. And please let me know how I can help you. And what else is exciting in my life? Again, I'm working and finishing up my Zika book. So if you're interested in that, or getting advanced copies or anything like that, and want to help me promote it, ideas and whatnot, let me know. I'm probably going to try to do a promotional in Brazil, and get one more disease off the ledger. So have a good evening. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to have had you, as my company. Bye-bye.